So back when I was growing up, both of my grandfathers were lifelong Republicans. They voted straight down the ticket Republican every time they voted. And I knew what they believed in and I knew what they stood for because they were always talking about it. They were always letting me know. That's why years later, when I heard Donald Trump talking, I said to myself, wait a minute, this isn't Republican. This isn't what my grandfathers actually believed in. The first time that I ever heard Donald Trump utter the words build the wall, I immediately flashed back in my mind to my childhood when a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, said, Mr. President, tear down that wall. And I remember hearing my grandfathers talk about how that walls could be built to keep people out, but they could also be used to keep people in, and that America was not about walls. But the harder Trump went and the more he doubled down on building walls and running people out and rooting people out like vermin, the more that he doubled down on that rhetoric, the more I said to myself, I just can't see my grandfathers being for this. I can't see them just rolling along with this. So I'm going to go back now and play you clips for two men that my grandfathers absolutely did vote for. And then we're going to work our way all the way up to George W. Bush talking about immigration. And look how far Donald Trump has taken MAGA away from the Republican Party. I'm going to make this point later once we get done watching all these clips that to the people that latched on to Trump, it was never about Democrat versus Republican. We'll get there in a minute. But first, let's take a listen to Ronald Reagan, a Republican president, talking about immigration. Take a look.
This, I believe, is one of the most important sources of America's greatness. We lead the world because, unique among nations, we draw our people, our strength, from every country and every corner of the world. And by doing so, we continuously renew and enrich our nation. While other countries cling to the stale past, here in America, we breathe life into dreams, we create the future, and the world follows us into tomorrow. Thanks to each wave of new arrivals to this land of opportunity, we're a nation forever young, forever bursting with energy and new ideas, and always on the cutting edge, always leading the world to the next frontier. This quality is vital to our future as a nation. If we ever close the door to new Americans, our leadership in the world would soon be lost.
Now, if Ronald Reagan were alive today and came out and said that as a Republican, Donald Trump would call him a rhino, a Republican in name only, and MAGA would roll right along with that, and they would be booing and shouting down Ronald Reagan. It just goes to show you just how far Donald Trump has taken MAGA away from the Republican Party, because that's what I remember when I was growing up and I heard Reagan saying that, a Republican president saying that. And that was something that both sides pretty much agreed on, is that we were the land of opportunity. This was the place that people could come to live the American dream. And what made us strong and what really made us great was our diversity. That was where our strength truly lied, is that we pull from all over the world. People comes here to want a better way of life. And in the very beginning, Donald Trump did act as though, and a lot of MAGA would say, oh, we're not against people, coming here. We just want to get the ones that are here illegally, which, by the way, no one is actually illegal. That's not a thing. But they started off saying that, and then eventually it was, we have to get them all out. And now what's happening out in Los Angeles, they're not going after violent gang members. They're not going in there and busting down gangs' doors. They're going to Home Depots. They're going to places of business. They're going to schools. People are afraid to take their kids to a graduation. That's the kind of world that we're living in now. But I'm going to show you two more Republican presidents who, by the way, I wouldn't have voted for any of the three men I'm going to show you in this video, but here they are making perfect sense. And here is one of my least favorite presidents of all time, George H.W. Bush, the first Bush, talking about the same thing. And again, can you imagine Trump's reaction to this if he heard it today? Take a look.
The children of illegal aliens should be allowed to attend Texas public schools free, or do you think that their parents should pay for their education?
I'd like to see something done about the illegal alien problem that would be so sensitive and so understanding about labor needs and human needs that that problem wouldn't come up. The problem has to be solved because as we have kind of made illegal some kinds of labor that I'd like to see legal, we're doing two things. We're creating a whole society of really honorable, decent, family-loving people that are in violation of the law, and secondly, we're exacerbating relations with Mexico. The answer to your question is much more fundamental than whether they attend Houston schools, it seems to me. I don't want to see a whole, if they're living here, I don't want to see a whole thing of 6- and 8-year-old kids being made, you know, one, totally uneducated and made to feel that they're living with outside the law. Let's address ourselves to the fundamentals. These are good people, strong people. Part of my family is a Mexican.
You know, folks, when he said these are good people and the crowd began to applaud, I realized right then and there that we've not heard that from a Republican politician probably since he said that. And it truly is sad. We have never heard Donald Trump utter the words, these are good people. We have never heard MAGA ever utter the words, these are good people who are just coming here trying to make a better way for themselves. All we have ever heard is them demonized and vilified and get told all the time that they're just they're violent criminals or violent gang members. They're going to come here and destroy our way of life. But there again was a Republican president who, if he said that today, he would immediately be an enemy of Trump. And I'm sure to the people who never saw these clips of Reagan and Bush, and I'm about to show you W too, I'm sure if those people, the MAGA people, saw these clips today, they would say, oh, well, yeah, those guys was all part of the system. Those guys was all part of the, you know, what's wrong with this country. It's not like that this is really going to win anyone in MAGA over, but I just wanted to show these clips to show you just how far that Donald Trump took MAGA away from the Republican Party and how this is not the Republican Party that my grandfather was talking about, because I know my grandfathers agreed with what Reagan and the Bushes are saying in this next clip. And folks, George W. Bush, I've never made any bones about it. I think he's one of the worst presidents of my lifetime. I'm never going to give him a pass. But here he is saying something that I absolutely agree with. This clip was a little bit longer than what I normally would play here on the channel, but it's worth every second of it. Take a look.
My view is that we are a land of immigrants, and we ought to recognize that. As a matter of fact, I believe America's soul is rejuvenated when people come to our country and work hard to realize dreams. There is an orderly way to have immigration, and that is to recognize people are coming here to do jobs Americans aren't doing, or are not capable of doing, or unwilling to do. And we ought to have a process that enables people to come and do those jobs. It's good for our economy. I think it's, and I think it prevents people from having to sneak in. There are laborers who do jobs people won't do, but there are also incredibly bright students who come. And I think it is a foolhardy policy to limit the number of workers that could contribute, for example, to the productivity of the United States in the internet world. I do believe there will be a rational immigration policy eventually passed. I think there's going to have to be some time. What's interesting about our country, if you study history, is that there are some isms that occasionally pop up. One is isolationism, and its evil twin protectionism, and its evil triplet nativism. So if you study the 20s, for example, there was an American first policy that said, who cares what happens in Europe? Well, what happened in Europe mattered eventually because of World War II. There was Smoot-Hawley, which was a part of an economic policy, which basically said we don't want trade. In other words, let's throw up barriers. And there was an immigration policy that I think during this period argued we had too many Jews and too many Italians, therefore we should have no immigrants. And my point to you is we've been through this kind of period of isolationism, protectionism, nativism. I'm a little concerned that we may be going through the same period. I hope that these isms pass, which would then allow for a more orderly look at immigration policy. But look, I was raised in Texas, and you know, there's a lot of focus on the Hispanic population. I mean, if you're raised in Texas, you understand what it means to interface with Mexican Americans who are Texan, and you realize that we share the same values: faith, family, you know, hard work, commitment to service, and I think we ought to welcome people from different cultures.
You know, folks, I got to be honest with you. As I sit and watch that clip, it's almost scary to me that George W. Bush could be that spot on about something and that he could see the direction that we were headed in. It truly is scary considering that George W. Bush was a guy who had so many dumb quotes that they actually had a calendar that had Bushisms, one for every day of the year. So 365 dumb quotes from George W. Bush. And I'm pretty sure they put out a volume 2 of that calendar. So that's who we're talking about. But there he is, making perfect sense. We are a land of immigrants. That don't get said enough. And these people are coming here to do the jobs that Americans either don't want to do or ain't qualified to do. It is good for our economy. And when he started talking about the whole, the idea of the America First policy, which says we don't care what happens in Europe, that's exactly what we're seeing right now from MAGA. So to anyone out there who says they're Republicans, but they follow Donald Trump, you're actually not. You are an extreme fringe of the Republican Party that Donald Trump hijacked and moved further to the right. And I would make this argument. What I started to say earlier in the video, I said I'm going to wrap it up over here, is let's just cut right to it. Okay, let's just cut through all the bullshit. The people who are supporting Donald Trump today wouldn't know a Republican or a Democrat if one bit them on their ass. It's not about Republican versus Democrat. It's not about left versus right to MAGA. It is they finally found someone who will empower them to be racist. That's what it is, plain and simple. And a lot of people get really mad. Oh, here he goes. He's playing the race card. I absolutely am, because that wasn't Republican beliefs. I just played you 3 Republicans that was before Trump that came along in my lifetime. I grew up. Reagan is the first president I remember seeing on TV. Carter was president when I was born, but I don't remember that. I remember seeing Ronald Reagan on TV, and I remember him saying things like he said in the clip I showed you. I remember him saying, "Mr. President, tear down that wall." I remember him saying, "This is a land of opportunity." And I went on to see George H.W. Bush say that, and of all people, George W. Bush say that. Then Donald Trump comes along and he takes it into a completely dark place. And here we are now watching everything that's unfolding in Los Angeles, and it's unfolding because of people's bigotry, plain and simple. Because if they actually had Republican viewpoints and values, this wouldn't be going on. You can say whatever you want to about Reagan and Bush and the Bushes. I'm not a fan of any of them. I wouldn't vote for any of them if they were here today. But I will, when someone says something that I do agree with and that they're right about, I'm going to point to it and say, hey, they were right about that. They may not have been the best presidents in the world, but they were spot on in those clips. And it just goes to show you that Donald Trump came along, took MAGA, and completely jumped the shark. And so to anyone out there that's like, I'm a Republican. No, you're not. If you're supporting Donald Trump, you're a bigot, plain and simple. There's no other way around it to me, folks. I can't find another way to slice it or to look at it, because that's not how Republicans used to talk. And can you imagine the place we would be in today if more Republicans did talk like that? Can you imagine if we didn't have all this hatred being slung at immigrants and instead we celebrated people coming here and living a good life? Can you imagine if instead of painting everyone as a violent criminal, we were talking about, like W said there, these are good people. They have the same values as us. They just want to make a better way for themselves. Let's make their lives easier. Can you imagine how far ahead we would be? But no, we had to have somebody come back and drag us back to medieval times, when you got people like Mike Johnson saying, oh, Newsom should be tarred and feathered. They love that type of hateful rhetoric, and they will continue to always double down on it, because if they take away that hateful rhetoric and go back to that Bush-Reagan style, MAGA does not exist.